Hi, Communication Development and Disorders class. This is lecture number 4. Things that you will need to complete this. You just need your interactive notebook. Go ahead and label in your table of contents that this is your these are your notes on language of infants and toddlers. Turn to your next clean page in your notebook and go ahead and take notes on this. There is no graphic organizer or note page for this, so the notes can go directly in there. You're also going to need internet access. You're going to need to toggle back and forth between this lecture, and then you're going to pause it at some points and go back to our Canvas page to watch videos that have been embedded in this specific module. So let's get started. When we talk about early communications, we are talking about key interaction patterns with our really youngest little children. This includes eye contact, shared reference, communication loops, and we talked about those, I believe, in lecture number 1. So those things should be fairly familiar to you. We like to, when we are talking about infants and toddlers, talking your way through the day, making sure that you are just kind of covering them in verbal language so they can start to become comfortable with those words and learn those words. And they will eventually begin to understand that every time you go outside, you talk about trees and birds, and every time we go to the grocery store, you show me an apple. And so that's just building their vocabulary. We have seen that higher levels of maternal responsiveness have been associated with children's later comprehension of speech. And so we want to make sure that if we are moms, dads, aunties and uncles, cousins, teachers, that we are constantly just bathing these children in words. So we talked about those key interaction patterns. Focus on meaning in early interactions, meaning you're just not talking, that a lot of your talking has to deal with something, and that is kind of with that shared reference. So if you're going to talk about an apple, pick up an apple so they can connect those words to a specific object. And then the importance of adult responsiveness. By you talking, you are making an impact in those children's lives. And also, when they make noise, you should look at them to make sure that they know, this also gives me attention. Some things that I do want you to know is we talked about eye contact and those key interaction patterns. A young infant should look at you and make eye contact. A lot of times, especially as our kids grow into toddlers, if they never really give you good, strong eye contact, sometimes that's a characteristic of that child being on the autism spectrum disorder. And so that is something just to be aware of. Okay, so we are going to look at infancy now, and we are going to break it down into all of those 5 levels of language that we talked about in lecture number 1. So we're going to start with phonological development, and specifically phonological development in infancy, specifically in utero. You can see that at the 25th week, children can perceive sound, which means if you're talking to them, they can hear that, which also means that if you're singing, they can hear that. If you're reading, they can hear that. If you're arguing, if you are kind of having a traumatic time in your life, they can also hear those sounds. 55th week in utero, they hearing is at a level similar to an adult's. So they can hear really, really well. And so, you might guard a toddler from the things that they hear. Think about that in a pregnant mama. In early infancy, at 1 month, they can distinguish between phonemes. And remember, phonemes is that smallest part of the sound. So they can distinguish between a f and a d. In a video that you will see here in a little bit, a child can decipher between a D sound and a B sound very early on, which is really fascinating. At 5 months, they can recognize the same phonemes, and so if you're doing some silly rhymes, they're going to be able to pick that up. A word that you do need to know is motheress. It's spelled just like the word mother and then E-S-E at the end, motheress. And this is known as child-directed speech, and it has a more exaggerated intonation and clearer articulation. And what it really does is provide infants with a clearer view of language. What we want to avoid is baby talking infants and babies and toddlers, and we've all heard that high-pitched, babyish speak that adults do. But we want to replace that with this idea of motheress of, I am going to speak clear. Do you see this apple? This apple is red, and it is sweet, and it is shiny, and so I'm actually slowing down my speech a little bit and making sure that I have clear articulation so they will know really how those words sound. Okay, I want you to pause here, and I want you to watch the video tuning into speech. Take notes on it, and I want you to highlight the thing that stood out to you the most in this video, and then we'll discuss it in class together. Okay, welcome back. We're continuing to talk about infant speech development. We will have early vocalization. For instance, cooing, we've all heard that. The cooing stage is where infants begin to manipulate their tongues and mouths in producing sounds. They are really trying to play with sounds, and sounds they hear they're going to try to mimic. Evidence supports that infants produce a small subset of sounds that are similar across all different languages. So our babies from India are making the same cooing sounds as our babies from Chicago, as our babies from Australia, an Asian country, an African country, which I think is just really fascinating. From there, we move from cooing, we move to babbling. At 4 to 6 months, they are reduplicating those sounds. They are trying to mimic us. Before 6 months of age, children who are deaf have the same speech abilities, but around that 6 months mark, their vocalization decreases. And so that's kind of one of the first signs that a child is having trouble with hearing. Now, before you leave the hospital, if you have a baby in the hospital, they are going to check their hearing, but a lot of times those can be faulty or something can happen in the first 6 months. And so that's just something to be aware of. At 8 to 10 months, we're going to talk about I can never say this word, echolalic babbling. That happens between 8 and 10 months again, and it's mimicking those adult speech. And then intonated babble. Those are the sounds as if the infant is carrying on a conversation. And all of that is in that phonological stage. This intonated babble, I know that you've heard kids speak like this, but what I want you to do is I want you to pause this. On our Canvas page, watch the YouTube video of Babbling of Babies. There's nothing to take notes over. It's just really amusing. I think it's fantastic, and it gives you a really good example of what intonated babble is. Okay, you just saw those super cute little YouTube babies on their intonated babble. Now we're going to talk about syntactic development in infancy. Things that we need to remember is that infants perceive sound distinctions. They really do be able to hear the difference between certain different sounds. They can detect changes in the order of sounds. And so they are really able to listen really well, and they can detect different sounds that they may hear. Syntax is now developing during this infancy, and as they observe and begin to participate, remember they're going to be mimicking those sounds. Syntactically, speech is shorter in length and less complex. Adults is speaking in shorter sentences, but something that you do need to know is that adults who use shorter and smaller vocabulary when speaking to small children, that is good, but your child is hearing less words. And so our sentences are much shorter. But again, we can have longer sentences for these little ones. Mother's speech gets longer and more complex as children grow. Her sentences naturally get a little bit longer, but then as soon as the child begins to speak, it's almost natural that the mothers and fathers begin to shorten their sentences because we're thinking that they're not being able to comprehend. Again, talk to them like adults. It's okay. Storybooks provide infants with more complex syntactic structure. I remember reading like novels to Charlotte when she was young, like a baby, because I was sick of reading like Brown Bear. And so, it wasn't any like super racy books, but it had adult syntax in it, and I would read it to her, but it was language that she was hearing. Now, when Oliver came along, I was reading anything that Charlotte wanted to read. And so, of course, Oliver's laying on the floor and he is hearing books that are not meant for infants, but it doesn't matter because we need for them to hear that complex syntax to be able to begin to build their language skills. For semantic development infancy, early associations between speech and meaning, meaning that a child knows this is how I'm communicating with the rest of the world. So a baby cries, they get attention. And as a mother, a father, maybe you've had younger siblings, or you've nannied or been around children a good amount, but children have different cries based on what they need. And so as a mother or a father, when you listen to your baby cry, you're going to be able to say, oh, that they're just wet, they're uncomfortable, or they're in pain, or they're angry. You'll be able to tell the different crying between the different sounds. What I want you to do right now is pause this, and I want you to watch the baby crying video that's embedded in this module. Okay, so I always think it's funny because it's sweet if I get to watch you guys watch that video, because some of you really cringe because you can't stand the sound of those babies crying. But we know that infants cry because their cries elicit response. For some of you listening to those babies cry, especially if you have headphones in, I can imagine that they were loud. They made you anxious or worried. But infants cry to get a reaction, for help, or for you to do something for them, even if it's just to play with them. And that is how they are developing their semantic development in infancy. Concept development, schemata are the idea of those words attached to concepts, and babies are going to be able to begin to understand this. Concept knowledge can develop before language labels like words are developed. So, for instance, they will understand the idea that something is soft or hard, or that there is the dog coming to them before they can attach the word to that. I think that is pretty much something that we assume, but it is worth saying. Direct and vicarious experiences are really important. Direct experiences, they start at birth, and those direct experiences are things that children remember through touch and taste and smell, seeing and hearing, and they are going to remember those direct experiences more than anything else. We know this. If I read you a book about the Eiffel Tower, you would remember it, but if I sent you to the Eiffel Tower, you would really remember it. That's the difference between a direct experience actually going, and a vicarious experience. And those vicarious experiences occur through visual presentations, like pictures in a book, or you can even get one of those books and it says shiny or fluffy, and it has like a piece of fur on it. It would be better if they really touched it in the real world. So books are really important, but at this age, and especially through children's lives, actual experiences are the best. Direct experiences, of course, have that greater impact. For symbol formation, specific words have objects or actions that will define the words. For a ball, if you say ball and you throw it, they're going to know that the ball gets thrown. Or a book, if you say, do you want to read a book, they know that that book is going to be read. Again, so those objects or actions have definitions. The processing and distancing, they are going to understand, go get your ball, do you want a rattle? They're going to understand all of those things. So talk to those kiddos, even in infancy. At between 8 and 12 months, they begin to comprehend numerous words. Their receptive vocabulary of a 10-month-old is 50 words. So they're understanding, receiving 50 words, which is pretty good for 10 months. They can understand those. And of course, they're probably going to be mommy and daddy, ball, book, all those basic things. Okay. Pragmatic development in infancy. During infancy, children begin to express communicative intent. Okay. So they want to also speak back with us, but they have not learned how to communicate in that way. So between 7 and 8 months old, a child will show objects to adults. They'll hold it up to them. And our natural reaction is to say, oh, do you have, and communicate back with them. At 9 months, infants reaches up and out for items they're wanting to grab. They want you to bring those into their world. 9 to 12 months, they can point and reach to attract attention. Hey, over here, give me that. 10 to 14 months, they have gestures are paired with vocalization. And so they might make like a sucking sound for their passy. They might dance to tell you that they want music. Those symbolic gestures often come very closely to the children's first words. It is just on the tail. It is about to happen. And they use those symbolic gestures, and then right on the end of that, they start to replace those with words. Picture books. A child will make a sound found on book pages because they know it's coming. Oliver had one book about pirates, and it had a cannon, and he would go boom before you would think that he could even understand those things. Let me see. They also have vocalization accompanied by rising intonation. So they will bring up their voice when they have a question or act surprised. They can change and fluctuate their voice tone, knowing that that is what adults do. Okay, so that's infancy. Now, toddlers. We typically think of toddlers as like a 2 or 3 year old. So an infant is from utero all the way up until you stop counting in months. So at 24 months, those 2 years old, that is pretty much a toddler. So phonological development in toddlers, they can start to produce specific phonemes, and it can vary from day to day. They are aware of the sounds that they cannot reproduce, and so they may avoid or refuse to pronounce words containing sounds that they can't say or they cannot pronunciate because they can't figure out how to form their mouth to make those certain sounds. If it's a TH, or the difference between P, B, and D, they may just completely avoid those words or even change the words. Both of my kids, Oliver, he had a blanket. We had blankies, ankas, all kinds of things to mean blanket. Charlotte, she would squirt people when she was really young, and she would take her little thumb and act like she was squirting a water gun, but she couldn't say squirt, so she would say furt, 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 like Seriously, out in public, look someone in the eye that we're passing in a grocery store and say, "Furt, furt, furt." Weird, weird kids. Um, let's see. Health problems may interfere with development of being able to reproduce these sounds, specifically ear infections. 85 to 90% of kids in the US experience an ear infection before the age of 6. And this is a big deal because sometimes you don't know your kid has an ear infection, and so it's affecting the way that they can hear. And if it goes unnoticed, it can actually cause some major disabilities in the child. It can affect the ability to recognize and distinguish between phonological characteristics. Infants with many ear infections have been known to have a reduced babbling, like we talked about with our infant kids. And so you just need to be aware of that as a teacher. You can see a picture of a baby with a cleft lip. As you can imagine, that will affect if a child can reproduce those sounds. There's also a cleft palate. Your palate is if you stick your tongue up on the top of the roof of your mouth. You can also have a cleft palate or a tongue abnormality. Children are still born tongue-tied, and so that is going to make a difference on what sounds that they can make. Semantic development. At the age of 1 year, they can create distinct vowel units to refer to specific objects or actions, not words. These are important because they are the first consistent sound patterns that the children will make. And you just learn those sounds and the objects or the meaning behind them as parents and as teachers. Evidence that children can create their own language by learning children's little sets of words. So these invented words, these proto words, or these idiomorphs, these invented words, that evidence that children can create their own language is shown in these invented words. You can encourage their language learning by saying, "Oh, Mukin, oh, Mukin, I heard you say that. Do you mean music?" And attach one word to the other. Things that you need to know. Nouns are acquired before verbs. This holophrastic stage are one-word thoughts like mama, up, home. Those type of things are things that words that they can communicate a huge meaning through just one word. At 1 to 2 years old, these children have about between 20 and 170 words in productive vocabulary, so words that they can say, but they understand a huge amount more. The receptive language is a lot higher. When children see others interacting with written language, semantic knowledge related to writing is also enhanced. And this is why, and you're going to hear me say this throughout the semester, it's really important. Like on my phone, I have an app called Shop Shop. That is where I put in my grocery shopping list. When the kids were really young, a lot younger, I purposely wrote it down on a piece of paper because I didn't just want them seeing me pushing on my phone. I wanted them to see, look, this language that I'm speaking can also be put down onto a piece of paper with this pencil and this piece of paper. Let's see. That looks good. Syntactic development in toddlers. Telegraphic speech is 2 to 3 word utterances like daddy come, mommy up, our dog Abby bark. Telegraphic speech represents both syntactic and semantic language knowledge because they're able to understand what the word means, the knowledge of vocabulary, and the word order. That in English, typically we have a specific word order that we use in our sentences. Difficulty with pronouns. Kids will have issues with I and you. It's difficult for an adult to model appropriate usage because when I say I am doing something and then they say I am doing something, the meaning completely changes. Um, this will begin to improve through preschool. Charlotte used to say, Tiki is the name of one of our grandmas, and she would say, Tiki, you want me, because she couldn't flip it on I want you. She got her pronouns all mixed up there. Morphemic development in toddlers. They are beginning to have more success with pronoun usage. It starts to begin. They start to be getting a little bit better at it. At the end of their second year, children usually begin regularly using plural forms of nouns. I do not want a donut. I want donuts. I want more than one. First grammatical morphemes are soon to appear. So progressive verbs, they start to put ing on the end of things. Again, plurality, difference between toy and toys. And then possessive, that is not just a dog, that is the dog's bone. Morpheme acquisition is not influenced by frequency of use in parents, which is kind of interesting, but they will eventually just get it on their own. Pragmatic development in toddlers. Initially, language is used instrumentally to satisfy needs, but then it really takes on different forms. So your interactional function, they are wanting to get your attention by saying, look. Your heuristic function is them trying to ask questions. What is this? Discovering things hands-on. Your imaginative function, children are pretending or role-playing that they're a dog or they're a kitty cat or a mommy. And then informative function, they are informing you of things. I have a turtle. My favorite color is orange. They're telling you things. And so initially language is used just to satisfy needs, but then it takes all four of these different forms. And that is what we do, as an adult. Pragmatic development in toddlers. Again, they have routine expressions like bye-bye. They begin to rely less on gestures as vocabulary builds. So they're going to stop waving that fat little hand of theirs. They're going to start saying bye. They begin to acquire print awareness. And this is the idea that if you hand a book to a child upside down and backwards, they are going to be able to put the spine in the middle of their body. And they're going to know that the book, if it's right side up, and they're going to be able to flip the pages from right to left, and they're going to be able to jabber away like they're reading a book. That's print awareness. They know which way it goes, which way it flows, and what happens when someone has a book in their hand. They're going to have an awareness of what books are used for and what they are not used for. They know that it's not a frisbee. It's something that you look at, and a story and fun comes out of. You can support scaffolding. Supported scaffolding by adults can aid through this developmental phase. And so if you are reading to your kids, this is going to happen sooner. I would like for you to pause this right here, and I would like for you to watch the Reading Rockets Becoming Aware of Print video. After that, you are finished with lecture number 4. I will see you guys tomorrow in class.